James and Melissa Parker lived in a modest two-story home on the outskirts of Louisville, Kentucky. Their lives appeared ordinary, quiet, almost forgettable from the outside. James was a retired Army sergeant who now co-owned a small neighborhood bakery with Melissa. The bakery wasn't wildly successful, but it paid the bills and gave them a routine. They were the kind of couple others looked up to, steady, polite, always together at Sunday service and hosting cookouts in their backyard when the weather allowed. To anyone watching, theirs was a picture-perfect life, a calm stream flowing through the chaos of the modern world. But streams can be deceiving. Beneath the surface, something had started to rot. James was a man of structure and habit. Every morning, he woke up at 4:30 a.m., jogged 2 miles, and opened the bakery by 6. Melissa used to join him in those early mornings, kneading dough, decorating pastries, and greeting customers with warmth. But over the past year, she had changed. She began sleeping in more, skipping shifts at the bakery, and claiming migraines or appointments. James didn't question her at first. He assumed she was burned out. Maybe she needed a break. He quietly picked up the slack, baking longer hours and managing the storefront mostly alone. He told himself it was just a phase, something temporary. But then, small things began to stack up. Melissa's phone would never leave her side. She started going out late, claiming to meet friends he had never heard of before. There were dinners she didn't eat, perfume he didn't recognize, and a new wardrobe she didn't explain. James took mental notes, but said nothing. His silence was not out of trust, it was out of calculation. Years in the military had trained him to observe, to study, to wait. And so he did. He began to notice unfamiliar names on credit card bills, expensive restaurants well outside their neighborhood, hotel bookings during the same nights she claimed to be at a friend's house. He never confronted her. Not once. Instead, he watched. His quietness, once a strength in his marriage, now served as a shield for the growing storm inside him. Every piece of evidence he uncovered was like a nail in a coffin he hadn't built yet. Melissa, meanwhile, was living a double life. To her social circle, she was the devoted wife of a humble veteran, but in secret, she had grown tired of the predictability. She wanted passion, excitement, something that made her feel alive again, and she had found it in someone else. A younger man. She met him at a fitness class she had joined on a whim. What started as flirty conversations turned into late-night drives, hotel rooms, and whispered lies. The thrill consumed her. And with each lie, she grew more reckless. James noticed everything. The text notifications she tried to hide. The faint smell of cologne on her skin. The lipstick stains that appeared on her coffee mugs, but never matched anything she wore around him. He watched the woman he once adored become a stranger in his own home. But still, he didn't say a word. Not when she came home at 2 a.m., not when she forgot their anniversary, not even when she laughed at something on her phone and turned it away when he walked by. What Melissa never understood was how deeply James had been wounded, not just by the affair, but by the slow, quiet way she erased their life together. He had been her partner, her protector, and now she treated him like a ghost. A man simply passing through her life, unseen and unneeded. But James wasn't a ghost. And ghosts, don't forget, everything was about to unravel. And it would all begin with one unexpected moment when James walked through the front door a few hours early. That small decision would set into motion a chain of events that no one could undo. Not her, not him, not anyone. It was a rainy Thursday evening when James decided to close the bakery early. A thunderstorm had rolled in unexpectedly, scattering customers and soaking the streets. He flipped the sign to closed, locked the door, and headed home in silence. The air smelled of wet pavement and regret. His thoughts were heavy, clouded by the same suspicions that had haunted him for weeks. He didn't plan to catch her. He just wanted to rest. But something inside him told him not to knock, not to make a sound, just walk in. When he opened the front door, the house was quiet, too quiet. No sound of the television, no music playing, no footsteps. Just silence. And the faint ticking of the hallway clock. James took a few steps forward, glancing around the living room. Melissa's purse sat on the dining table. Her shoes were carelessly kicked off near the entrance. Then he saw her phone on the couch, screen glowing. A message had just come in. Without hesitation, he picked it up. The screen revealed a series of unread messages from someone saved as Tyler. What he saw made his breath catch. There were long threads of texts, images, even voice notes. Words like "last night was perfect," "I can't stop thinking about you," and "when are you going to leave him?" flooded the screen like a gut punch. James stood frozen, the phone trembling in his hand. Everything he had suspected, every quiet theory he had played in his head, was now confirmed in full color. He scrolled back weeks, months. She had been seeing this man while lying to his face every day, while kissing him goodnight, while laughing with him in public. His knees felt weak. He sat down slowly, gripping the phone so tightly it left a red imprint on his palm. The betrayal didn't feel like a sudden blow. It was more like a slow unraveling of every thread of his life. He didn't scream. He didn't throw the phone. Instead, he did what he'd always done. He studied. He took screenshots, emailed them to himself, and placed the phone back exactly where he had found it. Then he stood up and walked to the bedroom. Melissa wasn't there. The bathroom was empty. He checked the backyard. Nothing. Her car was still in the driveway, but she wasn't home. James sat on the edge of their bed, hands on his knees, staring at the blank wall ahead of him. Minutes turned into hours. When Melissa finally walked in around 9:30 p.m., soaked from the rain, she looked surprised to see him. But James said nothing. He looked at her face, the mascara running slightly under her eyes, her shirt clinging to her skin. She spoke, maybe tried to explain why she was late, but he didn't listen. He only nodded, pretending nothing was wrong. Over the next few days, James became a shadow in his own home. He went through her drawers, found hidden receipts, discovered a second phone she kept in the laundry room. He traced addresses, checked the locations, saw patterns. The more he uncovered, the more detached he became. Not from her, but from the version of himself that had once trusted her. That man was gone now. What disturbed him most wasn't just the affair, it was the ease with which she lied. The carelessness. The way she had gambled their entire marriage for fleeting moments with a stranger. She hadn't even tried to hide it well. It was almost as if she didn't believe he was worth deceiving properly. As the days passed, James began to plan, not out of anger, but clarity. He didn't want revenge, he wanted answers. He wanted to see how far she would go if he said nothing. And more than anything, he wanted to know if she would ever stop on her own. She didn't. And what she did next proved she never would. It was a quiet Sunday morning when everything snapped. The kind of morning that should have been peaceful gray. Clouds hanging low, soft drizzle tapping against the windows, and the smell of brewed coffee drifting through the house. James sat on the living room couch, dressed in his usual weekend flannel, flipping through the newspaper as if everything were normal. On the surface, he looked calm. But inside, his body was alert, wired with a strange, unnatural stillness. He had hardly slept the night before, plagued by thoughts of betrayal, humiliation, and confusion. He kept wondering when it would end, or if it ever would. Melissa walked into the room just before 9 a.m., wearing a long cardigan and holding a tray with breakfast: scrambled eggs, toast, and a cup of coffee. The kind of breakfast she used to make him during their early years. Her face was neutral, unreadable. Her movements smooth and practiced. James glanced up briefly, not saying a word. She placed the tray in front of him on the coffee table. Then, everything exploded. Without warning, she reached under the tray, pulled out a black pistol, and fired 6 times. The first shot hit James in the chest, the second in his side. He tried to stand, but his legs gave out. More shots followed his shoulder, his arm, his lower torso. Time seemed to slow. The smell of gunpowder and blood filled the room. James collapsed onto the floor, gasping, vision blurring. Melissa stood over him, breathing hard, the gun trembling in her hand. Her face was blank, no tears, no panic, just silence. She didn't call 911. She didn't check if he was still alive. Instead, she dropped the weapon onto the floor and ran out the front door barefoot, her footsteps splashing in the rainwater collecting on the porch. A neighbor across the street, hearing the rapid gunshots, looked out the window just in time to see Melissa running down the street in her cardigan, soaked and shaking. That neighbor called the police. First responders arrived within 10 minutes. James was still conscious, though barely. Blood pooled around him, soaking the carpet and staining the wood underneath. He couldn't speak, but he was breathing. Paramedics worked quickly to stabilize him, applying pressure to the wounds and rushing him to the nearest trauma center. Surgeons operated for hours. Bullets had punctured a lung, fractured a rib, and torn through his shoulder muscle. His heart had miraculously been missed by less than an inch. He was placed in a medically induced coma as doctors monitored his condition closely. The hospital staff said it was nothing short of a miracle that he had survived the ambulance ride. Melissa was arrested that same afternoon, soaked, shaking, and silent. When questioned by police, she claimed it was self-defense. She told them James had found out about her affair, had become emotionally abusive, and she feared for her life. But investigators were skeptical. There were no bruises, no witnesses, no signs of a struggle in the house. And James had been sitting calmly on the couch when shot. The angle of the wounds didn't match her story. Police found no evidence that Melissa had reported any threats or abuse. Instead, they discovered the affair, the second phone, and several messages in which she had told her lover that she wished James would just disappear. Her story quickly began to crumble. The community was stunned. No one could believe that the sweet woman from the bakery, always smiling and handing out cookies, had attempted to kill her own husband in cold blood. But the truth was unavoidable. Melissa was charged with attempted murder and denied bail. As James lay unconscious in the hospital, the town watched in disbelief, unsure whether the man they thought was dead would ever wake up. But he did. And what happened next would take everyone by surprise. 3 weeks after the shooting, James Parker opened his eyes in a dimly lit hospital room. The sterile smell of antiseptic, the low hum of machines, and the constant beep of a heart monitor filled the space. His body felt heavy, his chest wrapped in thick bandages, pain pulsing with each breath. But he was alive. Somehow, after 6 bullets tore through his body, after losing more blood than any surgeon expected a man to survive, James had come back. And he remembered everything. Not a detail escaped him. The way she had looked at him before pulling the trigger, the coldness in her eyes, the calm, the certainty. James didn't speak much during those first days of recovery, but behind his still face, a storm raged. He wasn't just wounded. He had been betrayed and left for dead by the woman he had built his life with. And now she was out of jail. Melissa had posted bail 2 weeks after her arrest, supported by her defense team who painted her as a frightened woman pushed to the edge. Her claim of self-defense, though riddled with inconsistencies, was enough to convince the judge to allow her temporary release under strict conditions. She returned to the house where the shooting occurred, continuing life as if she hadn't just tried to murder her husband. James, too weak to protest, was moved to a motel on the outskirts of town whence he was discharged. The bakery was shuttered. The home he had once filled with love and years of memories now belonged to the woman who had nearly ended his life. But he didn't let grief consume him. Instead, he began watching. From the moment he left the hospital, James turned inward. His mind, once structured by military order and discipline, now focused solely on her. Every movement Melissa made, every social media post, every shadow in the window at night was accounted for. She didn't know he was watching from a distance, parked in his old truck down the block. He saw her walking in and out of the house, grocery bags in hand, as if nothing had happened. No guilt, no shame. There was no restraining order to keep him away, no active trial yet to place limits on his freedom. And so James watched, waited, and planned. Not recklessly, not with blind rage, but with the cold precision of someone who had seen war and lived through it. He began retracing every step leading up to the day she pulled the trigger. He replayed the betrayal over and over again, every lie, every moment she had looked him in the eyes and hidden the truth. He started writing down everything, dates, locations, her phone records, the hotel receipts. All of it, not for the police, not for the court, for himself. So he could see, without distortion, how carefully she had dismantled their marriage. The affair wasn't a slip, it was a choice. And the shooting wasn't an accident. It was an execution attempt. But what disturbed James more than her betrayal was the way she moved on. Melissa returned to her routines, redecorated the living room, even painted the walls as if trying to erase the memory of what happened. As if 6 bullets and a hospital bed hadn't meant anything, James began to see that Melissa never loved him the way he loved her. For her, their life was disposable. For him, it had been everything. And now he had nothing left to lose. No bakery, no home, no trust. What she had taken from him couldn't be measured in blood or scars. It was something deeper, his sense of safety, identity, and belonging. In its place, something darker had taken root. Something permanent. James didn't tell anyone what he was planning. Not his doctor, not the police, not even the few friends who had visited him in the hospital. Because what he was about to do wasn't meant to be shared. It was meant to be finished. The rain had returned the evening Melissa died. It was a soft drizzle at first, a gray haze settling over the neighborhood like a warning. The streets were empty. The air smelled like wet asphalt and impending resolution. Melissa pulled into the driveway just before 6 p.m., her car slowing to a stop as the windshield wipers thudded back and forth. She had just returned from the grocery store, unaware that someone had been following her for days, watching her habits, memorizing her schedule, counting down to this moment. She stepped out of the car, balancing 2 brown paper bags in her arms. Her hair was damp, her sweater clinging to her skin. As she walked toward the front porch, she didn't notice the figure standing at the edge of the yard, partially hidden behind the shadows of the overgrown hedge. There were no sounds, no threats, no warnings. James stepped forward with a slow, deliberate calm. His limp was faint, but still present. In his hand, he held a .38 revolver, an old weapon, reliable, simple. It had been tucked away in a shoebox for years, a relic of his time in the military. He hadn't planned on using it again. But this was different. This wasn't about war. This was about an ending. Melissa reached the front steps and turned the key in the door. The click echoed louder than it should have. She sensed something behind her and turned just in time to see James raise the gun. He pulled the trigger once. The bullet struck her chest with brutal precision. She collapsed onto the porch without a sound. The grocery bags spilled beside her, apples rolling across the wood planks, a carton of eggs shattering. Her body stilled almost instantly. The rain continued to fall, mixing with the growing pool of blood beneath her. James didn't run. He didn't move. He stood over her, watching the life leave her body. His expression was blank, no triumph, no satisfaction, only silence. A few neighbors heard the shot but didn't recognize it at first. Someone called the police minutes later, reporting what sounded like a firecracker. When officers arrived, they found James standing on the porch, soaked to the bone, the revolver still in his hand. He surrendered without resistance. At the station, James didn't speak for hours. When detectives asked why he had done it, he gave only one answer: "She got 6. I gave her 1. His words were cold and measured, but not filled with hate, only finality. He didn't try to justify it. He didn't ask for mercy. The trial drew national attention. Headlines framed it as a twisted cycle of love and vengeance. Some saw James as a victim pushed to the edge, others as a man who crossed the line. The prosecution painted him as a cold-blooded killer, but his defense emphasized the trauma he endured, being betrayed, shot, and left for dead. The jury was conflicted. In the end, James was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 15 years in prison. But his declining health and clean record led to early release after 8 years. He served his time quietly, never speaking to the press, never writing a book, never explaining anything beyond that single sentence. After his release, James moved into a small cabin deep in the Kentucky woods. Alone, off the grid, out of reach. The town eventually forgot, the headlines faded, and the house where it all began was sold, repainted, and turned into a rental property. But those who remember the story know it was never about a man snapping or a woman cheating. It was about erosion, the slow decay of trust, the unbearable silence of betrayal, and the terrifying simplicity of revenge. James Parker didn't become a monster in a single night. He became 1 inch by inch, wound by wound, lie by lie. And when it was over, there was nothing left to rebuild. Asterisk.